I stood in front of the coffin, my black veil trembling slightly as the church doors closed behind the last guest. The organ's low notes still vibrated in the air, heavy and suffocating, as if the entire building itself mourned the loss of my husband. My fingers clutched the edge of the pew until my knuckles turned white. Everyone said he was gone. Everyone told me to be strong, to accept it, to let him rest in peace. But nothing about this funeral felt real. My heart should have been shattered into 1,000 pieces. Instead, it beat with a cold, strange emptiness, a numbness that scared me more than grief. And then my phone vibrated in my purse. I almost didn't look, thinking it was a cousin checking in or a neighbor asking about food arrangements. But when I pulled it out, when I saw the screen, the world around me tilted. It was a text message from an unknown number. 4 words. I'm still alive. Don't believe them. I froze. My vision blurred as I stared at the glowing letters, trying to breathe. Still alive. The coffin was only a few steps away. The man inside was supposed to be my husband of 30 years, the man everyone was crying over, the man whose body had supposedly been pulled from the wreckage of a car accident on a stormy night. But if he was still alive, then who was in that box? My knees almost gave out. A cold sweat broke across my back, and I had to grip the pew so tightly that my fingernails scratched the wood. My husband was alive. Alive. And if he was alive, then this was no tragedy. This was something darker, a play, a cruel trick that I wasn't supposed to unravel. I looked around the church. My son Daniel was standing by the altar, shoulders slumped, eyes red from crying. Relatives whispered behind handkerchiefs, their faces heavy with pity for me, the poor widow who had lost her partner. I wanted to scream, to show them the message, to tell them the dead man wasn't dead at all. But I swallowed the words. I kept my lips sealed because something inside me warned that if I spoke too soon, I would lose my only chance to uncover the truth. The priest's voice droned on about eternal rest, about devotion and loyalty, about the bonds of family that last beyond the grave. I barely heard him. My eyes flicked toward the coffin again, to the flowers arranged neatly on top. White lilies. My husband always said he hated lilies. He joked they smelled like death. And yet here they were, the centerpiece of his farewell, as if mocking me with their sickly perfume. I remembered the night they told me about his death. 2 policemen at my door, their hats in their hands, their voices solemn as they explained he had lost control of his car on the highway. I remembered collapsing onto the floor, wailing like an animal, my chest tearing with the sound. And now, less than a week later, he was texting me that he was alive. Which one was the lie? The accident or the message? I wanted to walk straight to the coffin, tear off the lid, and see for myself, but I couldn't. Dozens of eyes were watching me, waiting for the widow to break, to sob, to throw herself onto the casket like the women in soap operas. Instead, I stayed still, frozen in my seat, because deep down I was terrified of what I might find if I looked inside. What if it wasn't him at all? What if I had been mourning a stranger? And worse, what if everyone else knew except me? As the final prayer ended, Daniel approached me, his hand trembling as he offered to help me stand. I let him hold me, but I couldn't meet his eyes. My son believed his father was gone. He was grieving honestly, innocently, while I held the weight of an impossible secret. I glanced down at my phone again, half expecting the message to vanish like a hallucination. But it was still there, glowing on the cracked screen, still alive. Don't believe them. The coffin was lifted by pallbearers, the weight of wood and flesh straining their arms. The procession began toward the graveyard, the footsteps of mourners echoing on the stone floor. I followed in silence, my black dress brushing the cold tiles, my mind spiraling with questions that had no answers. If my husband was alive, where was he? Why had he faked his death? And most terrifying of all, why had he left me to bury him like this? At the graveside, the earth gaped open like a wound. The coffin was lowered slowly, the ropes creaking, the crowd murmuring prayers. I stood at the edge, staring down, my throat dry, my body trembling. The priest handed me a handful of dirt, and I let it slip through my fingers onto the lid. Each grain fell like a nail in a coffin that might not even belong to my husband. Behind me, relatives whispered about how brave I was, how dignified. They didn't know that inside I was already unraveling. As people drifted away, leaving flowers and condolences, I stayed behind, staring at the fresh mound of soil. The sky darkened with heavy clouds, and the first drops of rain fell, sliding down my face like tears I couldn't shed. I whispered to myself, "Why, Julian? Why would you do this to me?" My voice was lost in the wind, but my heart screamed louder than any storm. That night, when the house was silent and Daniel had gone to bed, I locked myself in the kitchen with only the dim light above the sink. I opened my phone again, scrolling through the unknown number, hoping for another message. Nothing came, just those 4 words. I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands, staring at the family photos on the wall, our wedding day, his arm around me at the beach, Christmas mornings with Daniel opening presents, memories that now felt poisoned. If he was alive, then every image on that wall was a lie. Every promise he had ever made turned to ash. I thought about the insurance papers he had signed years ago, the life insurance policy we had argued about. He insisted it was for me and Daniel, just in case. But what if that was part of the plan all along? What if faking his death wasn't just betrayal, but theft? I tried to push the thought away, but it stuck like a splinter in my mind. The house creaked in the silence, every sound amplified by my nerves. I found myself whispering, as if confessing to the walls, "I buried my husband today, and tonight I found out he's still alive." What kind of man does that? What kind of husband destroys his family with a lie so cruel? I pressed the phone to my chest, feeling the cold glass against my skin, as if holding it would make the message vanish or somehow give me strength. I walked to the bedroom we had shared for decades. His pillow still smelled faintly of cologne. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dent his body had left, and I felt a sudden wave of anger rise above the grief. He had stolen not only my trust, but my dignity. He had made me a fool in front of my entire family, my neighbors, the church, the whole town. And worst of all, he had dragged me into mourning a death that never existed. I turned to the camera, to you, my listener, my silent witness, and I ask, what would you do if the man you loved faked his own death and left you to bury him while he walked free in another country, maybe even in the arms of someone else? Would you forgive him? Would you stay silent? Or would you hunt him down, no matter the cost? Because as I sat there in the darkness, I knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the edge of my sanity, and a journey that would uncover betrayals so deep they would rip my family apart forever. And one day, sooner than he expected, my husband would see me again. But next time, I wouldn't be the grieving widow. I would be the storm he never saw coming. The night after the funeral, I couldn't sleep. My house, once so full of his presence, now felt haunted, not by a ghost, but by a lie. The ticking clock in the hallway grew louder with every passing second, like a hammer striking my skull. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling until the pale blue of dawn crept through the curtains. That message had burned itself into my mind. Still alive. Don't believe them. 4 words that had shattered everything I thought I knew. By morning, the numbness had turned into a sharp need for answers. I couldn't keep living in uncertainty. I needed proof. So while the world still slept, I went into his study. A room I had avoided since the day the police came to my door. It still smelled like him. Ink, aftershave, and old paper. His desk sat untouched, everything neatly arranged, as if he would walk in any minute to sit down with his coffee. My hand shook as I reached for the drawer. The lock clicked open with the spare key I had hidden years ago, just in case. Inside, I found the usual clutter: pens, receipts, business cards. But then, beneath a stack of old files, I saw a folder marked with my husband's handwriting. It was labeled simply, Policies. My heart thudded. I pulled it out, sat down, and opened it. What I found made my blood run cold. There were life insurance documents, thicker and more detailed than the policy we had once argued about. I remembered that argument vividly. He had insisted that the policy was just a safety net, something responsible men do. I had laughed at him then, teasing that we weren't rich enough for anyone to care. He had snapped back, saying, "It's not about being rich, it's about being prepared." I thought he was being dramatic, but as I flipped through the paperwork now, I realized this was no ordinary policy. The payout was enormous, far more than what he had told me, and the dates, my stomach twisted. The policy had been updated just 3 months ago, 3 months before his so-called death. I dropped the papers onto the desk, staring at them in disbelief. Had he planned this all along? A staged death to trigger the payout, leaving me with the money while he disappeared? But then, another thought struck me like lightning. What if the beneficiary wasn't me at all? My hands shook as I flipped to the final page. My name was there, but so was another, a secondary beneficiary. I read the name twice, unable to believe it. Our niece, Emily. The room spun around me. Emily was my sister's daughter, a young woman I had welcomed into our home, treated like my own child when her parents struggled. She had always been close to Julian, closer than I was sometimes comfortable with, but I never let myself think badly of her. She was family. She was blood. And now her name was written into my husband's life insurance policy as if she had a rightful claim to his death. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop a sob from escaping. Memories flashed in my mind. Emily sitting too close to Julian at Christmas dinners, her laugh ringing a little too brightly when he told jokes. Emily brushing his arm lightly when she passed him a dish. Emily visiting our house when I wasn't home, saying she came to borrow books from our library. I had dismissed it all as coincidence, as my own paranoia, but the truth had been hiding in plain sight. I shoved the papers back into the folder, my breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. I knew I had to keep this discovery a secret. If Emily was involved, if Julian was alive and with her, then showing my hand too early could destroy my only chance of uncovering the full plan. I placed the folder back exactly where I found it, careful not to leave a trace. Later that day, when Daniel came to check on me, I forced a smile and told him I was resting. He hugged me, his grief heavy on his shoulders, and I felt a stab of guilt. He didn't know. He couldn't know, not yet. How could I tell my son that his father had betrayed us both, and not only with another woman, but with his own cousin? That evening, unable to bear the silence, I went through his laptop. It felt like trespassing, even though the man I was searching for had already trespassed into the deepest part of my soul. His computer was old, slow, and nearly empty. Too empty. It had been wiped clean. No emails, no documents, no browser history. Just a cold, sterile machine, as if he had prepared it for me to find. My hands trembled on the keyboard. But he had forgotten something. In the downloads folder, tucked away like a ghost, was a single file, a scanned receipt from a car rental company. The date was 1 week before the accident, and the location. Lisbon, Portugal. My blood chilled. Why would my husband rent a car in Lisbon if he was supposedly working in Chicago the week before he died? I printed the receipt, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my pocket. My heart pounded with the thrill of finding a clue, but also with the terror of what it meant. He had been in Europe. He had traveled behind my back, and if the message on my phone was real, maybe he was still there. The house felt smaller that night, the walls pressing in as the storm outside rattled the windows. I poured myself another glass of wine, staring at the Lisbon receipt on the table. It felt like a puzzle piece in a picture I wasn't ready to see. But one thing was clear. My husband had faked his death, and he hadn't done it alone. He had help. And the name written on that policy told me exactly who it might be. I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window, the rain streaking down the glass like tears. "Why her, Julian?" I whispered. "Why Emily? She called you uncle. She sat at our table. She was part of our family." My voice cracked, but the rage beneath it grew stronger. He hadn't just betrayed me as a wife. He had betrayed the sacred bond of family, turning love into a weapon, trust into a trap. I couldn't tell anyone yet, not Daniel, not my sister, not even my closest friend. This wasn't just grief anymore, it was war. And wars are not won by speaking too soon. They are won by patience, by gathering every weapon, every truth, until the enemy has no escape. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I opened my journal and wrote down everything I had found. The message, the insurance policy, the Lisbon receipt. I wrote with shaking hands, but I knew I needed a record. Something no one could erase. Then, before blowing out the candle, I whispered to the empty room, "If you think you can bury me with your lies, Julian, you're wrong. I'm not the one in the coffin. You are." The days after the funeral blurred together like a long, suffocating dream. People came with casseroles, flowers, and sympathetic words, but I could barely hear them. Every smile, every pat on my hand felt like a performance staged for the wrong audience. They were mourning a man who wasn't dead, and I was pretending to, wearing black, lowering my head, speaking softly, all the while hiding the evidence I had found. The insurance policy naming Emily, and the receipt from Lisbon. I carried those papers in my purse everywhere, like talismans of a reality no one else could see. One afternoon, when the house was finally quiet and Daniel had gone to work, I heard a knock on the door. My heart jumped into my throat. For one terrifying second, I thought it might be him, Julian, standing there alive in the flesh. My hand trembled as I turned the knob, but it was not Julian. It was Henry Collins, an old family lawyer who had handled minor contracts for us years ago. His hair was thinner, his suit more wrinkled, but his eyes carried that same sharpness I remembered. "Mrs. Hale," he said gently, bowing his head as if the word widow still carried weight. "May I come in? I thought we should talk." I let him in, unsure of his purpose. He set his briefcase on the table, his hands lingering a little too long on the leather handle. "I was surprised," he admitted. "When I heard about Julian's accident, something didn't sit right with me. He'd been in touch only weeks before about certain arrangements. Then suddenly he's gone? Forgive me, but I need to ask, did anything seem strange to you?" My lips parted, ready to spill everything. The message, the papers, the suspicion eating me alive, but instinct told me to hold back. I studied him instead, his lined face, his cautious tone. Was he truly here to help me, or was he fishing for information for someone else? "Strange," I echoed, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "Everything about death feels strange, Mr. Collins." He gave me a long look, as if measuring the weight of my words. Then he opened his briefcase and slid a manila folder across the table. "I probably shouldn't be showing you this yet, but you deserve to know. Julian updated several documents in my office shortly before the accident. He asked me to keep them confidential. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now," he pushed the folder closer, "now I think you should see." My breath caught as I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of bank transfers, large sums wired from our joint accounts into an offshore fund. But the name on the recipient line wasn't Julian's, it was Emily's. The room seemed to tilt around me. "Why would he do this?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. Mr. Collins cleared his throat. "The transfers began 6 months ago, small at first, then larger. He said they were investments for the family's future, but when I asked why Emily was the beneficiary, he grew defensive. I assumed he had his reasons. I never imagined. His voice trailed off, heavy with implication. I closed the folder, clutching it against my chest like a shield. My niece. My own blood. The girl who called me Aunt Lydia, who sat at my kitchen counter eating cookies after school. She wasn't a child anymore, but still, she was family. And yet here were the cold, undeniable numbers. Hundreds of thousands siphoned into her name. "Thank you, Mr. Collins," I managed, though my throat was tight. "You've given me more than you know." He hesitated at the door, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Hale, if you feel unsafe, trust your instincts. People who fake deaths, who move money this way, they don't stop at half measures. Be careful." When he left, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever. I sat at the table staring at the folder, my mind spinning. The picture was getting clearer, but also more monstrous. Julian hadn't just abandoned me. He had funneled our money to Emily, rewriting the story of our family's future without a word to me or our son. And now, with the life insurance policy, with the staged death, it all fit together like a puzzle too cruel to exist. That night, as the rain battered against the windows, I lit a single candle and let my mind drift backward into the memories I had ignored for too long. I saw Emily at 18, shy but ambitious, laughing with Julian in the garden as he taught her how to fix the lawnmower. I had felt a twinge of unease then, something about the way her eyes lingered on him, but I had scolded myself for even thinking it. She was family. She was young. I was being ridiculous. But then I remembered the family reunion 2 summers ago. We were all gathered at the lake house, cousins running barefoot in the grass, laughter echoing across the water. I had gone inside to fetch more drinks and walked past the study. Through the half-open door, I caught a glimpse of them, Julian and Emily, standing too close, their voices low, their smiles secretive. The way she touched his arm, the way he didn't pull away. My stomach had twisted then, but when they noticed me, they laughed it off, saying they were discussing her college applications. I let it go. God help me, I let it go. Now, in the flickering candlelight, those memories returned like daggers, each one sharper than the last. How many signs had I ignored? How many times had I silenced my own instincts in the name of trust? The following morning, something happened that turned my unease into raw fear. I was walking to the bakery to pick up bread when I noticed a black sedan parked across the street from my house. The windows were tinted, the engine idling. When I stepped outside, the car pulled away slowly, almost too slowly, as if letting me know it had been there for me. My skin prickled with dread. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but later that afternoon when I returned from the store, the same car was parked at the corner. This time, I saw a man's silhouette behind the wheel. I hurried inside, locking the door, my pulse racing. Was I being watched? Was Julian monitoring me from afar, making sure I stayed quiet, making sure his plan went undisturbed? Or was it Emily sending someone to keep me under control? The thought sent a chill down my spine. That night, I called my sister, Emily's mother, pretending casual concern. I asked how Emily was doing, if she was still traveling for her job. There was an awkward pause on the other end of the line. "She's fine," my sister said too quickly. "Busy. You know how young people are." Her voice carried a tremor I hadn't heard before, and then she added something that nearly stopped my heart. She told me she might be moving overseas for a while. Something about Lisbon. The word slammed into me like a punch. Lisbon, the same city on the car rental receipt. My blood roared in my ears. I murmured something vague and hung up quickly, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the phone. It wasn't coincidence. Emily and Julian were tied to Lisbon. My husband had been there. My niece was going there. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, and the picture they painted was unbearable. I sat alone in the dark kitchen, staring at the phone, my mind a whirlwind of rage, grief, and fear. Outside, the black sedan appeared again, headlights washing over my curtains. This time I didn't move. I let it sit there, watching, while I whispered to myself, "If you think you can erase me, you're wrong. I see you now. I see everything." The third week after the funeral, the weight of my secret became almost unbearable. I had evidence. Yes, the life insurance policy, the Lisbon receipt, the transfers to Emily, but evidence means nothing when you're the only one who believes it. Everyone else still treated me like a grieving widow who had lost her mind to sorrow. And maybe that was part of their plan. Maybe the cruelest thing wasn't that Julian had faked his death, but that he had left me stranded in a world where the truth sounded insane. It started with Daniel. My son had always been gentle, the kind of boy who held my hand even when he was taller than me, who called me every Sunday from college just to ask if I had eaten. But grief had changed him. Or maybe it wasn't grief at all. Maybe it was disbelief in me. One night, when I tried to show him the Lisbon receipt, his expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. "Mom," he said carefully, like he was speaking to a child, "I think you're imagining things. Dad is gone. We buried him. You're letting your pain twist everything." "It's not imagination," I whispered, shoving the paper into his hands. "Look, his name, the date, Lisbon. He was there. He planned this." Daniel barely looked at it before pushing it back across the table. "Mom, you need rest. You're not thinking clearly. Emily has nothing to do with this. She's like my sister." The words stung worse than a slap. My son, my own blood, choosing denial over truth. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him until he understood, but his tired eyes, red from sleepless nights, stopped me. He wasn't my enemy. He was just blind, and blindness was exactly what Julian wanted. The next day, whispers began to reach me from the community. At the market, I overheard two women muttering near the bread aisle. "Poor Lydia," one said. "She's gone mad. Talking about conspiracies, about Julian being alive. It's sad, really. Grief makes people lose their minds." Another shook her head. "I heard she's been calling lawyers, digging through his papers, saying Emily is involved. Can you imagine? Her own niece. It's disgusting." I left the store without buying a thing, my face burning. The rumors had spread. My isolation was no longer just in my family. It was in the entire town. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, pitying, judging, dismissing me as a widow unraveling in her loneliness. But I wasn't unraveling. I was waking up. That night, the black sedan returned, parked across from my house for nearly an hour. I sat in the dark by the window, clutching the curtain, watching the faint glow of a cigarette inside the car. Whoever was in there wanted me to know I was being watched. It was intimidation, nothing less. And I realized, with a sick twist of fear, that if I pushed too hard, I might not live long enough to expose them. My sleep grew fractured. When I did manage to drift off, nightmares plagued me. Julian's face half covered in dirt, Emily's laugh echoing from behind closed doors, Daniel turning his back on me while I screamed for help. I would wake drenched in sweat, gasping for air, the sheets tangled around me like restraints. One afternoon, my sister came by unannounced. She looked nervous, her smile too wide, her voice too sweet. She brought me a basket of fruit, setting it on the table as if the gesture could erase the storm between us. "I just wanted to check on you," she said. "You've been distant." I studied her face. She avoided my eyes, fiddling with the hem of her blouse. I asked where Emily was, if she was still planning to move overseas. My sister's hand froze. "She's busy," she said quickly. "Don't drag her into your grief, Lydia. She has her whole life ahead of her." The dismissal cut deep. My sister didn't believe me either, or maybe she knew and didn't want to admit it. Maybe she was protecting her daughter, or worse, complicit in it. I felt the walls closing in tighter, my circle shrinking until I was the only one left inside. Later that week, I went to visit the cemetery, not because I believed Julian was in the ground, but because I needed to see the grave with my own eyes. The soil was still fresh, the headstone polished and clean. I knelt down, pressing my hand against the cold granite. "You think you've buried me," I whispered, "but I'm the one who will bury you." As I spoke, I noticed something strange. A corner of paper poking out from beneath the flowers someone had left. My breath caught. I pulled it out carefully. It was damp, but I could still read the words. A plane ticket confirmation. One way, from Chicago to Lisbon, in Emily's name. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped it. Why had it been left here at Julian's grave? Was it a careless mistake or a cruel taunt meant just for me? Either way, it was another piece of proof, another nail in the coffin of their lies. That night, I tried again to show Daniel. I handed him the damp ticket, my voice shaking. "Look, this isn't coincidence. She was in Lisbon. She's with him, can't you see?" Daniel's face hardened. "Mom, stop, please. You're destroying yourself. You're destroying me. Emily would never do this. Dad would never do this." His voice cracked on the last words, but he didn't back down. "If you keep pushing this, I'll have no choice but to talk to a doctor. You need help." The betrayal in his voice nearly broke me. My son was slipping away, convinced that I was the one losing my mind. And maybe that was part of Julian's plan, too. If everyone thought I was crazy, no one would listen when I finally exposed him. That night, after Daniel slammed his bedroom door, I sat alone in the kitchen with the candlelight flickering against the walls. The plane ticket lay on the table, the ink smudged from the rain. I pressed my fingers to my temples, fighting back the tears. "They want me isolated," I whispered. "They want me silenced." But even as the words left my mouth, something inside me hardened. They underestimated me. They thought a widow's grief could be used as a mask for madness. But grief wasn't my weakness. It was my weapon. The pressure was unbearable, the loneliness suffocating, but deep beneath it all, a fire was burning. If Julian thought he could bury me under lies and rumors, he was wrong. He had taken my trust, my family, my peace, but he hadn't taken my will. And soon, he would see just how dangerous a woman with nothing left to lose could be. By the 4th week, the storm inside me had become unbearable. Every day I woke with the same pounding question in my mind. Was I the only one in the world who could see the truth? Everyone else had turned against me. Daniel called me unstable. My sister shut me down. The neighbors whispered that grief had stolen my sanity. The weight of their disbelief pressed against my chest until breathing felt like a battle. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the creak of the old wood in the wind, I almost wondered if they were right. Maybe I was insane. Maybe my husband really was dead. Maybe I had invented everything, the message, the documents, the Lisbon receipt, out of desperation to hold on to him. But then I would open my drawer and see the folder where I had hidden all the evidence. My trembling hands would flip through the papers, the life insurance policy naming Emily, the transfer records from Collins, the car rental receipt, the plane ticket confirmation with her name. Each piece screamed the same thing. I was not crazy. I was being deceived. And that knowledge was both my salvation and my curse. One night, after Daniel had gone to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the evidence spread out on the table. My candle flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. My hands gripped the edge of the wood until my knuckles ached. I whispered to myself, "Why Julian? Why her? Why this?" The silence answered with nothing but the groan of the house and the distant hum of the black sedan outside. That car had become my nightmare. Every night it was there, sometimes idling, sometimes just parked in silence with its lights off, like a predator lurking in the dark. Once, when I pulled back the curtain too quickly, I saw a camera flash. Someone was photographing me inside my own home. I dropped the curtain, heart slamming against my ribs. and pressed my back to the wall. My whole body shook. This wasn't grief. This wasn't paranoia. I was being hunted. The pressure mounted until even my body began to betray me. I couldn't eat. Food turned to ash in my mouth. I couldn't sleep. The moment I closed my eyes, images of Julian's smirk and Emily's mocking laughter filled my head. I lost weight, my face hollow, my eyes ringed with shadows. Daniel noticed. "Mom, you look terrible," he said one morning, his voice tinged with both worry and frustration. "You need help." When I tried to tell him again about Emily and Julian, he slammed his fist on the table. "Enough, he's dead. Stop torturing yourself. You're destroying us both." He stormed out, leaving me alone with the echo of his anger. I sank to the floor, clutching my knees to my chest. My son, the one person I thought I could rely on, was gone from me too. They had succeeded in isolating me completely. I was a widow, a mad woman, a ghost in my own house. I wanted to give up. I wanted to crawl into bed, pull the covers over my head, and never wake again. But that was the night everything changed. It was close to midnight when the phone rang. Not my cell, the landline, the one almost no one used anymore. The sharp ring sliced through the silence like a knife. My stomach twisted as I picked up the receiver, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello?" For a moment, only static. Then a man's voice, low and urgent. "Mrs. Hale, listen carefully. Your husband is alive. He's in Lisbon, and he's not alone." My grip on the phone tightened so hard my knuckles cracked. "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice cracked. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you stop acting like you're blind. They're planning something bigger than you think. They're moving money, documents. If you want proof, be at the old train station tomorrow morning. Platform 3, 9 o'clock. Don't tell anyone. And for God's sake, don't let them see you." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, frozen, the dial tone humming in my ear. My breath came in shallow bursts. Was this a trap? Or was it the lifeline I had been praying for? That night I barely slept, pacing the floor like a prisoner waiting for execution. I thought of every possibility. Maybe Julian had sent this mysterious caller to lure me out, to silence me once and for all. Maybe it was the police, finally investigating. Or maybe, just maybe, it was someone who wanted to help me, someone who believed me. When dawn broke, I dressed in dark clothes and slipped out of the house before Daniel woke. The air was sharp and cold, my breath visible as I hurried through empty streets. My heart pounded with every step, my ears tuned to every sound behind me. The old train station loomed ahead, its cracked windows and rusting beams a relic of a forgotten era. Platform 3 was deserted. Weeds pushed through the concrete, graffiti covered the walls, pigeons fluttered overhead. I waited, clutching my purse like a shield, every nerve in my body stretched to breaking. Then I saw him. A man in a worn coat, his hat pulled low. He glanced around before walking toward me, his hands hidden in his pockets. I tensed, ready to run, but something in his eyes, sharp, urgent, alive, made me stay. "You don't know me," he said quickly. "Names are relevant. What matters is this." He handed me a small envelope. Inside is a copy of a bank statement. Julian transferred over $1 million into an account in Lisbon. The co-owner of the account is Emily. My breath caught as I tore the envelope open. The paper inside was grainy, a photocopy, but the names were clear. Julian Hale and Emily Crawford. My knees buckled. I leaned against the cold metal railing to steady myself. The man lowered his voice. "You're in danger. They know you're suspicious. That car outside your house, it's them. They want you quiet until the transfer is complete. If you keep pushing without protection, you won't survive." I stared at him, my heart hammering. "Why are you helping me?" His jaw tightened. "Let's just say I used to work with your husband. I know the kind of man he really is, and I can't stand by while he destroys another family." Before I could ask more, he turned and walked away, vanishing into the maze of broken buildings. I was left standing there, the statement clutched in my hand, the truth burning through me like fire. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting. His face was pale, his eyes hard. "Where were you?" he demanded. "Out," I said simply, hiding the envelope behind my back. "Mom, you can't keep doing this. People are talking. They think you're losing it." "I'm starting to think so, too." His voice broke. "I can't lose you like I lost Dad." I wanted to tell him everything, to show him the statement, to scream the truth into his face until he believed me. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had every piece of proof. Undeniable. Unshakable. So I just hugged him instead, holding him so tightly he finally pulled away. That night, as I sat alone in the dark, I laid the bank statement next to the other evidence. The picture was complete now: the insurance policy, the transfers, the Lisbon receipt, the plane ticket, the joint account. There was no doubt. Julian was alive. Emily was with him, and they were stealing everything I had built. But instead of despair, something new filled me, a grim, steady determination. I had been pushed to the edge, isolated, humiliated, nearly broken. But now I had proof, and soon I would have justice. The night after I returned from the train station, I sat at my kitchen table with every piece of evidence spread out before me. The candlelight flickered across the papers like a spotlight on the fragments of my broken life. The life insurance policy naming Emily, the Lisbon car rental receipt, the transfer documents from Collins, the plane ticket confirmation left at Julian's grave, and now the joint account statement in both their names. The puzzle was complete. My husband wasn't dead. He had abandoned me, betrayed our vows, stolen our money, and chosen our own niece to stand beside him. For weeks, I had felt powerless, isolated, like a ghost screaming at a world that refused to hear me. But as I stared at the documents, something inside me shifted. The grief, the doubt, the self-loathing, they melted into something sharper, harder. Determination. If Julian thought he could bury me under lies, if Emily thought she could replace me, they were both about to learn that I was not a woman who went quietly into the night. I was done being the widow everyone pitied. I was done being dismissed as a lunatic. I was done being afraid. I gathered the papers carefully, slipping them into a leather folder, and locked it in the old safe behind my bedroom dresser. Only I knew the combination. My hands trembled as I spun the dial, but my heart beat with a new rhythm, steady, purposeful. I whispered to myself, "This is my weapon, my truth, my war." The following morning, I visited the bakery where I had worked part-time for years. It wasn't just about buying bread, it was about normalcy, about showing my face in public with my head held high. The same neighbors who whispered about my madness were there, sipping coffee, watching me with suspicious eyes. I ignored their stares, bought a loaf of rye, and walked out without a word. But inside, my resolve hardened. They could mock me now, but soon they would witness the truth explode in front of them. That evening, I sat Daniel down. I didn't show him the new evidence yet. I knew he wasn't ready. But I looked him in the eye and said, "Son, I know you think I'm losing my mind, but I swear to you, one day soon you will see what I see. And when that day comes, I need you to remember this moment. Remember that I never stopped fighting for the truth." His face softened for just a second, doubt flickering in his eyes. Then he shook his head and walked away, leaving me in silence. Still, that flicker was enough. A seed had been planted. The next step was clear. I needed to follow the trail to Lisbon. If Julian thought he could hide across an ocean, he underestimated me. I called Mr. Collins, asking to meet him in his office. When I arrived, he looked tired, his desk stacked with files, but his eyes sharpened when I slid the folder across the wood. "This is everything I found," I told him, my voice steady. "Proof that Julian is alive, proof that Emily is with him, and proof that they're stealing everything that belongs to me and my son." He examined the documents, his brows furrowed. Finally, he leaned back, exhaling slowly. Mrs. Hale? Lydia? This is more than a family betrayal. This is fraud. International fraud. If you're ready, I can help you prepare a case, but it won't be easy. You'll need more than papers. You'll need to catch them in the act. The words rang in my ears like a challenge. Catch them in the act. I nodded, my jaw tight. Then that's what I'll do. That night, I returned home and pulled out an old suitcase. As I folded clothes into it, my hands moved with a precision I hadn't felt in weeks. Each shirt, each pair of pants, was a declaration of war. I packed my passport, my journal, and the folder of evidence. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the hollow-eyed woman reflected back at me. But this time, instead of pity, I felt something else. Power. I whispered to my reflection, "You buried me alive, Julian, but I'm still here, and I'm coming for you." Lisbon was nothing like I remembered from old travel magazines. It wasn't the city of pastel tiles and bright sun that tourists adored. To me, it was a labyrinth of shadows, alleys that whispered betrayal, and sea winds that tasted of salt and lies. I arrived with one suitcase, one folder of evidence, and a heart pounding so violently I thought the whole airport could hear it. Every step through customs felt like walking into enemy territory. I wasn't here for leisure. I was here for war. Mr. Collins had arranged a discreet contact, a Portuguese investigator who slipped me the address of a hotel near the river. "He's there," the man told me in clipped English, his eyes darting as if even saying Julian's name was dangerous. "Checked in under an alias, but the passport scan matches. He's with a young woman, American." He didn't need to say her name. I already knew. That night I stood outside the hotel, my palms damp, my throat dry. The building glowed gold against the dark sky, its balconies draped with flowers, its lobby buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. I felt sick knowing he was in there, alive, breathing the same air as me, while I had been left to bury an empty coffin. I waited until the lobby emptied a little, then slipped inside. My black coat blended with the shadows, my suitcase left behind in a cheap room across town. I walked straight to the elevators, my pulse racing. The number I had been given burned in my mind. Room 314, third floor. The hallway was silent, carpet muffling my footsteps. I stood in front of the door, my hand hovering over the handle. My body shook so hard I had to steady myself against the wall. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of shared dreams, laughter, arguments, and promises, all leading to this moment. I slid the spare card the investigator had given me into the slot. The light flashed green. The door opened with a soft click. The room smelled of expensive cologne and perfume, an intoxicating mix that made bile rise in my throat. Clothes lay tossed across chairs. His shirt, her silk scarf. A half-finished bottle of wine stood on the table, 2 glasses beside it. I stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. Then I saw him. Julian. Alive. He stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his hair a little grayer, his shoulders a little heavier, but it was him. The man I had buried in my heart. The man whose grave still sat, back home, covered in flowers. My knees went weak, my vision blurred, but rage kept me upright. He turned when he sensed me. His eyes widened, his mouth fell open. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then he whispered my name like a curse. Lydia. I felt every muscle in my body tremble, but my voice came out steady. You're alive. He dropped the phone, stammering. You shouldn't be here. Shouldn't be here? I stepped closer, the folder clutched in my hand like a blade. I buried you. I stood over your grave while you drank wine with her. I mourned you while you emptied our accounts. You left me to rot, Julian. You left me for our niece. His face hardened, shame twisting into arrogance. You don't understand. Then explain it, I spat. tears burning behind my eyes. Explain how 30 years of marriage meant so little you faked your death. Explain how you could look me in the eye and vow till death do us part, then choose Emily, our blood, over me. He stepped forward, lowering his voice, trying to control me the way he always had. You were too weak, Lydia. Always clinging. Always cautious. Emily sees the world differently. She understands ambition. She makes me feel alive. I slapped him before I even realized my hand had moved. The sound cracked through the room. He staggered back, touching his cheek, fury flashing in his eyes. You make me sick, I hissed. I thought I lost you to death, but death would have been kinder than this betrayal. He sneered, straightening his shirt. Go home, Lydia. Take what's left. Stop digging before you regret it. I stepped closer, close enough to see the sweat on his brow, close enough to smell the perfume clinging to his skin. I held up the folder, shaking it in his face. I have everything, Julian. Every transfer, every receipt, every lie. And soon the whole world will see it. You wanted me silenced, but I will be your echo. You can't bury me again. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. For the first time, I saw fear flicker there. I turned to leave, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. As I reached the door, I heard a soft sound, a gasp. Emily stood in the doorway to the bathroom, her hair loose, her face pale. She looked at me not with shame, but with defiance, her lips curving into a mocking smile. Aunt Lydia, she said softly, as if greeting me at a family dinner. I guess the dead don't stay buried, do they? The air between us crackled like fire. I knew then that the private confrontation was only the beginning. The real war would be public, brutal, and final. The morning of the hearing in Lisbon felt like the sky itself was holding its breath. The courthouse loomed above me, its marble pillars gleaming coldly in the pale sunlight. I stood at the foot of the steps, clutching my folder of evidence, my heart pounding against my ribs. This was it. No more whispers in kitchens, no more tears in the dark. Today the world would see the truth. Inside, the courtroom was crowded. Journalists lined the benches, cameras flashing as if hungry for scandal. My sister sat near the back, pale and trembling, while Daniel kept his eyes down, torn between disbelief and a loyalty he didn't know where to place. On the other side sat Julian, alive in the flesh, his expensive suit tailored perfectly, his face calm, as if he were merely attending a business meeting. Beside him was Emily, dressed in cream silk, her hand resting lightly on his arm as though daring the world to challenge their bond. The judge entered, his gavel striking once, the sound reverberating through the chamber. This court will hear the matter of Hale versus Hale, he announced. My stomach twisted at the sound of our name, no longer a symbol of family, but of betrayal. Julian's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth. Your Honor, this is a tragic case of a grieving widow whose pain has clouded her judgment. My client is alive, yes, but he never faked his death. It was a misunderstanding, a clerical error with the police report. He has chosen to begin a new life, and while unfortunate, that is not a crime. Gasps rippled through the room. My hands shook, but I forced myself to stand. A misunderstanding? My voice echoed louder than I expected. I buried an empty coffin. I mourned a ghost, and all the while, he was funneling money into an account he shared with her. I pointed at Emily, whose smile faltered for the first time. The judge raised a hand. Do you have proof of these claims, Mrs. Hale? My chest tightened as I opened the folder and laid each document on the table. The insurance policy naming Emily, the transfer records Collins had given me, the Lisbon receipt, the plane ticket found at the grave, and finally, the bank statement linking their names. Each page landed like a stone in water, the ripples spreading across the silent courtroom. This is not grief speaking, I said, my voice steadier now. This is fraud. This is betrayal. This is a man who staged his own death to steal from me and our son. and a young woman who chose greed over family. The judge studied the documents, his brows furrowed. Murmurs swelled among the spectators. A journalist scribbled furiously in his notebook, while Daniel finally raised his head, his eyes wide as if seeing his father for the first time. Julian's composure cracked. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering sharply, his jaw clenched. Emily, sensing the shift, tried to squeeze his hand, but he pulled it away. The judge looked up. "Mr. Hale, do you deny these transfers?" Julian rose, his face flushed. "I deny nothing, Your Honor. But let us be honest. My marriage was over long before this. Lydia lived in the past, clinging to weakness. Emily offered me a chance at a future. Is it a crime to seek happiness?" My voice cut through the murmurs. "It is a crime to bury your wife in lies. It is a crime to drain the life you built together, to steal what you never earned, to deceive your son into grieving a father who never died. Happiness? You call this happiness? This is theft. This is incestuous betrayal. This is the death of dignity." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, the flash of cameras. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but the chaos had already begun, the truth spilling into the world like blood on marble. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. Mr. Collins rose from the back, a new document in his hand. "Your Honor, if I may," he said. The judge nodded. Collins approached, laying down a notarized file. "This is a recording I received from a private investigator weeks ago. It captures a conversation between Mr. Hale and Miss Crawford in a hotel parking lot. They speak of forging contracts, of liquidating assets, of removing Mrs. Hale from her own home." The judge signaled for it to be played. The room hushed as the audio crackled to life. Julian's voice filled the chamber, confident, cold. "Don't worry about the papers. Lydia trusts me too much. Soon everything will be ours." Then Emily's laugh, sharp and cruel. "That old hag won't know what hit her." The words struck like thunder. Gasps turned into outrage. My sister buried her face in her hands. Daniel's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, his voice breaking. "Dad, how could you?" Julian's face drained of color. Emily tried to whisper something in his ear, but he shoved her hand away. His mask of control shattered. The judge's voice thundered above the chaos. "This is no longer a matter of misunderstanding. This is deliberate fraud and conspiracy. This court will proceed with charges." The bailiffs moved forward. For the first time, Julian looked afraid. His eyes darted toward me, desperate, pleading. "Lydia, please," he stammered. "We can fix this. We can—" I rose slowly, my hands steady, my voice calm. "There is no fixing this, Julian. You buried yourself the moment you chose her, and now the world knows." As the bailiffs led him and Emily away, the cameras flashed wildly, capturing their fall. The courtroom buzzed with voices, outrage, pity, fascination. I stood in the center, not as a broken widow, not as a mad woman, but as the woman who had survived, who had fought, who had brought the truth into the light. And for the first time since that cursed funeral, I felt alive. The scandal spread faster than wildfire. By the time I stepped out of the courthouse, the air was alive with the hum of reporters, cameras clicking like a storm of locusts, microphones thrust toward me, voices overlapping in a frenzy of questions. "Mrs. Hale, did you know your husband was alive all along? How do you feel about your niece's betrayal? What do you say to the community back home?" I didn't answer. I walked through the sea of flashing lights with my head high, clutching the folder of evidence to my chest like a shield. For the first time, I wasn't hiding. For the first time, they believed me. The next morning, my name was everywhere. Headlines screamed, "Businessman fakes death to steal family fortune. Husband and niece caught in international scandal." My picture was on the front page, my eyes fierce above the caption, "The widow who exposed the truth." The phone rang constantly. Old friends who hadn't spoken to me in years called with shaky voices, apologizing for doubting me. Neighbors left flowers on my porch with notes that read, "We're sorry. We should have listened." Even Mrs. Peterson, the woman who once whispered at the market that I was going mad, stood at my door with tears in her eyes. "You were right, Lydia," she confessed. "All this time. You were right, and we failed you." But the most powerful shift came from Daniel. My son walked into the kitchen that evening, his shoulders heavy, his face pale. He held the newspaper in his trembling hands, the headline glaring back at him. He set it on the table, unable to meet my eyes at first. "Mom," he whispered, his voice raw. "I'm sorry. I didn't believe you. I thought you were losing your mind, but you were fighting for us. You were fighting for me." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "You didn't want to believe, Daniel, and that's not your fault. They played us both, but now you see." Tears welled in his eyes, and for the first time since Julian's fake death, I saw my son again. Not the broken boy who had lost his father, but the man who finally understood the truth. The fire spread beyond family and neighbors. Letters poured in from strangers, widows, wives, children of betrayal, thanking me for my courage, telling me that my fight gave them hope. One woman wrote, "My husband tried to sign away my business without telling me. After hearing your story, I stood up to him. You gave me strength. Even the police chief from my town called me personally." His voice carried both shame and respect. "Mrs. Hale, we failed you. We filed that accident report too quickly, without verification. We should have questioned the inconsistencies. I promise you, from now on, no one will dismiss your instincts again." The scandal was no longer just mine. It became a public drama, dissected on talk shows, debated in courtrooms, shared across the world. Julian and Emily's names were dragged through mud, their photographs plastered with words like traitor and conspirator. The video of their arrest circulated online, millions watching as the man once admired as a successful businessman was led away in handcuffs beside the niece who had become his accomplice and lover. But amidst the noise, I found quiet victories. One evening, I walked into the bakery I hadn't visited since the funeral. The air smelled of fresh bread and cinnamon, the bell above the door chiming softly. Customers turned when they saw me, and for the first time, no one whispered about madness or pity. Instead, they clapped. Spontaneous, genuine applause filled the little shop, the sound washing over me like a balm. "You were right, Lydia," the baker said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You fought for the truth when no one else dared. We're proud of you." I left with a loaf of bread tucked under my arm, my heart lighter than it had been in months. The fire that once threatened to consume me had turned outward, burning away the lies, leaving only the truth. And the world, at last, was on my side. Justice came slowly, but it came. The court froze every account tied to Julian and Emily, their assets seized under suspicion of fraud and conspiracy. The life insurance company pressed charges for attempted fraud. The bank investigated the offshore transfers, and the police built a case that stretched across borders. My husband, the man I once believed I would grow old with, was now reduced to a headline, a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. Emily fared no better. She tried to plead ignorance, painting herself as a naive young woman manipulated by an older man. But the audio recording and the bank statement told the truth her lips couldn't hide. She had laughed about me, called me the old hag, planned the theft as eagerly as he did. Watching her stand in that courtroom, stripped of her smug smile, was almost surreal. I had loved her once, taught her to bake cookies in my kitchen, called her my niece. Now she was just another stranger who had carved a wound into my family. When the sentencing came, the judge's words rang in my ears like a hymn. Julian received 10 years for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Emily was sentenced to 5. Neither looked at me as they were led away in chains. Perhaps shame was too heavy, or perhaps they still believed they had been wronged. Either way, it no longer mattered. The community that once doubted me now turned their pity into respect. People nodded at me on the street, not with whispered gossip, but with admiration. The bakery became busier than ever, customers stopping not just for bread, but to shake my hand, to thank me for standing tall. At first, their words felt like salt in an open wound, because what good is admiration when your marriage and family have been shattered? But over time, I began to understand. I hadn't just survived. I had protected what was left of my dignity. Daniel, my son, struggled most of all. He stopped visiting the prison after the first time, saying he couldn't bear to see the man he once called father reduced to a caged liar. At night, he would sit across from me at the kitchen table, staring at his coffee as if it could answer questions he was too broken to ask. One evening, he whispered, "Mom, all my life I thought Dad was the example I had to live up to. Now I don't know who I am without him." I reached across the table, taking his hand. "You are not him, Daniel. You are better. You believed his lies because you loved him, but love is not weakness." The weakness was his. Tears welled in his eyes, but for the first time since the ordeal began, I saw him breathe easier. The house felt different too, lighter. The shadows that once clung to the corners seemed to lift, replaced by the warmth of something new. I took down Julian's photographs from the hallway, replacing them with pictures of Daniel, of my parents, of moments that still held truth. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about reclaiming the walls of my home, refusing to let betrayal stare at me from every frame. At night, I sometimes still woke with a start, heart racing, convinced I heard the hum of that black sedan outside. But when I pulled back the curtain, the street was empty. The watchers were gone. The fear had passed. What remained was a quiet strength, a resilience I never knew I carried until betrayal forced it out of me. One afternoon, as I swept the porch, Mrs. Peterson came by with her grandchildren. She paused at the gate, her voice soft. "Lydia, I know this doesn't heal everything, but I want you to know, you gave us all courage. You showed us that even when the whole world doubts you, the truth still matters." Her words stayed with me, because in the end, that was the aftermath. Not just the punishment of those who wronged me, but the rebirth of my own strength. Julian and Emily lost their freedom, their reputations, their power. I lost the illusion of a perfect family, but I gained something greater, the proof that dignity can survive even the deepest betrayal. And when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw a widow or a victim. I saw a survivor. The seasons shifted while the scandal faded from headlines, but in my heart, the storm slowly gave way to something quieter, something steadier. Life didn't snap back to what it had been. That was impossible. Too much had been burned away, but from the ashes, new things began to grow. I poured myself into the bakery. The ovens roared from dawn to dusk, trays of bread and sweet pastries sliding out golden and warm. The customers who once whispered now came with smiles, telling me stories of how they followed my fight, how they admired the way I stood against humiliation. I wasn't just the woman who baked their daily bread anymore. I was the woman who refused to be buried by lies. Daniel moved back home for a time. He helped with deliveries, managed accounts, carried sacks of flour on his broad shoulders just like his father once did. At night, we shared quiet dinners, sometimes laughing, sometimes sitting in silence, but always together. One evening, as we ate simple soup at the kitchen table, he looked at me and said, "Mom, I see you now. I see your strength. I want to be like you." My throat tightened, but I only smiled because those words were enough to heal cracks I thought would never mend. In the house, I created new rituals. I opened the windows every morning, letting light flood the rooms that once felt suffocated by shadows. I planted flowers in the garden, bright marigolds and roses, a defiance against the darkness that had tried to take root. And each time I watered them, I whispered to myself, "This is mine. This life, this dignity, this peace. It's mine." Sometimes, when the nights grew quiet and memory crept in, I thought of Julian. I thought of the man I once loved, the promises whispered under starlit skies, the laughter we shared before betrayal hollowed him out. But I no longer cried. I no longer begged to understand. He had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine, and mine was a path forward. Emily, too, became a fading shadow, a cautionary tale of greed. I no longer wasted energy on hate for her. What punishment could I imagine that was harsher than the one she had given herself? A lifetime branded not as a niece or a lover, but as a conspirator who betrayed her own blood. One Sunday morning, I stood in church again, the same place where I had once buried an empty coffin. But this time, sunlight poured through the stained glass, bathing the pews in color. As I sang with the congregation, I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I knew I had survived the worst and walked out with my head high. And now, I tell my story to you. Because betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It comes from the people you least expect, the ones you love, the ones who share your blood. It comes like a knife in the dark, and it leaves you doubting your own mind. But hear me. The truth has a way of breaking through. It doesn't matter how deep they bury it, how many lies they weave around it. Truth is stubborn, and when it finally rises, it burns away everything false. So I ask you, if you were in my place, if the person you trusted most faked his death, stole your life, and chose your own niece over you, would you stay silent? Or would you fight, even when the world calls you mad? I fought. And I stand here today, not as a widow, not as a victim, but as a woman, reborn. If you've listened to my story until the end, I want you to tell me where you're listening from. Write it in the comments, because every voice matters. Every story of survival matters. And if my story has reached you, it means betrayal didn't win. Like, share, subscribe, so more people will know that dignity can survive anything, even death itself. Because in the end, I buried him with the one thing he couldn't fake, the truth.